Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I've given everyone a couple of minutes for coming. There'll be a few more that show up probably, but I'm thrilled that so many of you have shown up. So what I'm going to do in this session is give you a PowerPoint presentation, because I've been teaching for like more than 40 years now. And what I wanted to do was to share what I can in 1 hour of the things that I think are important for anyone teaching any form of posture, movement, breathing, mental control. And it could be in the form of yoga, qigong, martial arts, dance, meditation, gymnastics, this sort of stuff. So I'm going to give my best summary, and along the way I'll talk about the things that I think are useful. I'm talking about the things with posture, movement, breathing, mental control that are working towards health, happiness, and longevity, especially. So you can see whether you put yourself in that category or not. But after talking for about an hour with a PowerPoint presentation, which hopefully should streamline me a little bit, then I'll open it for questions, and you can ask some things perhaps. And I'll go for at least half an hour for questions, and then if there's that much keen interest, we might stay a little bit longer as well. So send me a message if you have a problem, but probably I can just begin now and go for it. And so what I'll do is I'm going to share my screen and begin the PowerPoint presentation now. And here. Okay, so here's my PowerPoint presentation, and thank God for PowerPoint. Here is my formal introduction to the teacher advice to teachers of any practice involving posture, movement, breathing, and mental control for health, happiness, and longevity. So, first of all, my name is Simon Borg-Olivier. For those of you who don't know it, I'm a physiotherapist, I'm a yoga instructor, I'm a qigong instructor, and I've done a whole bunch of other stuff. Over the many years I've been practicing, and I've been practicing 55 years, teaching for 40 years. And one of the things that I say to people is I'm trying to blend ancient wisdom from the traditional cultures all around the world with modern medical science. And I've done 3 degrees in human biology, and one of them was in physiotherapy. And so this is what I'm trying to do. I believe we're modern people living in a very unnatural world, and I'm trying to use my understanding of what I learned from both my traditional teachers coming from Tibet and India and China and Japan and South Africa, South America, the indigenous cultures of Australia as well, and try and fuse it with what we need to know as modern people living in a very unnatural world. I don't think you can just do, say for example, if we're talking about yoga, you can't just do traditional yoga when you've got a modern body which has been mainly damaged severely, significantly, by sitting on chairs in the form of cars, trains, buses, toilet seats for 5 to 15 hours a day. Okay, so the philosophy or approach that I have is to combine the ancient methods of things like yoga and qigong, martial arts, etc., with modern movement approaches of movement-based physiotherapy and exercise-based physiology and things like this. And also to prioritize not so much strength and flexibility and fitness, which many people focus on, and obviously which is important, but to put a little bit more emphasis than is often put on practices that improve physical, physiological, and mental health without causing injury or stress. So I like to look at the body in 5 ways, and we want to have health and happiness and longevity in these 5 levels. So the first level is the physical level, and that includes things like strength and flexibility. And I really want to maintain, and I've got good history in being able to do the maintenance of your physical body in terms of giving a pain-free functional body. That's obviously important. We do need a pain-free functional body. As I got older, and I'm 64 now, I'm less interested in creating, massive amounts of strength and flexibility. And the reasons for that I can come to later. But the problems include that the more you work on creating strength and flexibility, often it causes physiological stress, which then causes problems on a physiological level. It's important you focus not just on the physical body, but also your physiological body, which include things like the health of your nervous system, your cardiovascular system. That's how well energy flows and how well blood flows inside your body, and how you can deal with stress and how predominantly calm you are. And also then the functioning of the important organs of health, happiness, and longevity, which include your immune system, your digestive system, and your reproductive system. And I believe if you can maintain a pain-free, functional body, which has lots of energy, you're predominantly calm, then that's an invitation for mental happiness as well. And if you've got mental happiness and physiological well-being and physical pain-free functional body, then you can also have good social health. You can have healthy relations with your family, with your friends, your community, and then you can also have a good lifestyle. And lifestyle can also be considered to be financial health, or your ability to live in a way which, you can have a purpose in your life that works well for you. I believe it's also important to foster a supportive learning environment. And these things that I'm telling you are things that I do, but I suggest that if you're teaching, these are the things you want to consider when you're teaching as well. So encourage exploration, curiosity, and personal growth. I might put that picture of me on the right side, on the left side. Okay, so where is it? The principles of safe and effective movement teaching include to individualize your practice, to adapt to each student's needs, abilities, and goals. That's important. And this comes a little bit by knowing who your audience are. And you can do that if you are teaching small classes. It's really important to talk to everyone, get a history, etc. If it's an online session, what I often do is I ask people to fill in some sort of form to tell me a bit about who they are. If you want to increase people's physical or physiological well-being, then it's important to increase what they're doing in terms of physical, physiological, and mental inputs, but to do it in a way where you progressively increase what they're doing, but without strain. The more you get to a place of strain where people feel like it's causing stress, physically, physiologically, or mentally, then what happens is they start entering a place which we call the flight or fight response. And this flight or fight response can give short-term gains, but often starts to give long-term problems, especially in terms of immune, digestive, and reproductive health. So if you want very quick returns for strength and flexibility alone, you can push people the way most people do. But I found that it's just not sustainable. So keep this in mind. And so the third point in this slide is having sustainable techniques. Teach methods that promote not just short-term gains, but long-term health. And that's something that, like I said, I'm 64 years old. So in the first 10 or 20 years of my teaching, I didn't realize that some of the things that I was teaching in the 1980s, which are very similar to what many people are teaching now, just do not allow sustainability. And I was maintaining my students, many of them would stay 5 or 10 years, and then their bodies would start to not be viable to practice what I was teaching in the 80s and 90s, which, as I said, is what many people are teaching now. So I've developed in the last 20 years ways of working which are more sustainable practices which don't take people so much to failure, which make them practice in a way where they can do it for long periods of time. If you're talking about the word yoga, for example, then they say that to achieve yoga, you have to do something in a way where it becomes effortless. If you're talking about the sutras of Patanjali, they say that, when you come to the physical aspects, the asana type practice, they say that, or they being Patanjali in this case, said that you need to be doing something which is firm but calm, but then it's sustainable, and that you should be able to do it to a level where it becomes effortless. And that's when all dualities cease and you start to get the connection we're looking for. It's important to emphasize internal awareness, so you need to get people to listen to their own bodies, to feel the subtle changes and respond intelligently to those inside their body, which means the whole time from the very beginning of my teaching, and I recommend for your teaching, that you encourage people to not just copy you, but to feel what feels appropriate for themselves, and not so much go for the look of what they're doing, but more for the feeling. And that's something which gives much better long-term results, I think. Okay, so I'm talking about teaching posture, movement, breathing, and also mindfulness. But if we're talking about teaching postures, then offer frameworks for alignment, but don't say something is right or wrong. In the years that I've taught, there was always a period where I'd say, this is the right way to do something, and then there's always an exception. There's never really a right way or wrong way of doing things. For example, many of you who have studied with me and who studied with teachers like Iyengar, for example, would learn that in standing postures, for example, the front leg should always be slightly turned in at the foot, and the back leg should be slightly turned out, so that then you can try and turn the front thigh outwards, try and turn the back thigh inwards. And this is something which is a guideline, but it's not a rule. And if you impose that on a significant proportion of people, say over the age of 50, then many of them will get significant hip problems. Because many people, as they get older, start to have hip problems, which mean their hips don't turn inwards as easily anymore. So by forcing someone to put their foot in a particular position, you can jam their hips, you can even jam their spine. So alignment is important, but be wary about people's foot positions, for example. And at the beginning of this session, we were talking a bit about foot positions. And what I get people to do generally, if I'm doing simple standing positions in the beginning, especially when I don't know people, is just to take a couple of steps and then stand, say, for example, with their feet hip width apart. And if they take a few, movements of one leg up, one leg down, people often stand and they realize that one leg is turned out more and the other leg turned out less. And that looks asymmetrical, but actually that's the way their body works. And I believe it's really important to work from your core. And so if you impose on your core by putting your feet in a particular position as part of an alignment guideline, it can often impose on the core and cause stress either on your knees, your hips, or your lower back. And the same is going to be true with your hands if you're putting your hands on the floor. So my alignment focus is more on the on working from the core out to the arms and legs, and less working from the legs and arms into the core, because that type of imposition just tends to cause problems. Secondly, it's important to encourage natural curves and stability in a person in their posture, and that means not forcing them into perfect shapes. It's also, when I say natural curves, a lot of people talk about the neutral spine or the natural spine. And as a physiotherapist, I saw this being very popular in the 1990s especially, and it went all over the world, that people talk about you must maintain a neutral spine. And the neutral spine, of course, is this where the upper back is in a slight forward bend, the lower back's in a slight back bend. But actually, if you force this, it can cause a lot of problems. And if someone has, say, scoliosis, one of the first things that I'll do with them is get them to put their spine in the position which feels most comfortable, which for many people doesn't look straight. And this is a big discussion, but I'm saying don't just impose what you think a natural curvature is. Find what's their comfortable natural curvature. And that's the same with any of the joints as well. And, although, you might have the aim to change someone's physical body, if you force people's physical bodies, often it can cause a lot of problems energetically. And energetically, I mean physiologically. So just keep this in mind. Nothing's wrong or right. These are just suggestions. So in terms of stability, it's important to focus on stability from the inside out. And when I say from the inside out, you need to consider that the core of your body is this region that people often talk about, but the core of your body is not just a bunch of muscles. The core is an invisible tiny spot between your navel and your pubic bone inside, and around it is all your internal organs, your reproductive system, digestive system, immune system. The main parts of these systems are there, and around these and interwoven between them is your enteric nervous system, also called the gut brain. And this enteric nervous system is the essence of your core. And if you can connect the thinking brain in your head with your gut brain at your core, this effectively is subject and object working as one, and that's the meditative state. So it's important to focus on the stability that comes from moving from your core, from breathing from your core, from acting or resisting from your core, and not thinking of locking your core like many people do and overholding patterns which often people come into in daily life. And what we want then is to create fluid joint mobility, fluid spinal mobility, and it gives a lot better result. Okay,
Hey
so when we're
Simon,
teaching movement in the form of yoga, qigong, martial arts, dance, etc., all of which that I have a great passion for, fluidity over rigidity is very important. When people talk about flow in terms of yoga, you hear it a lot. I'm doing a flow class or this class. Probably the most important thing to realize with flow is that if you want to make energy move, you can't flow by moving left and right. You can't flow by going up and down or forward and backward. You have to flow by changing what I'll call dimensions or movements. So you can go flowing, not by going left or right or up and down, but you can flow by going left, then up, right, then down, and not making sharp turns, but smooth curves, and always changing the dimension of the movement or the direction of the movement. And this is an important thing, because you can imagine if you're doing, driving a car and you drive forward and backward, you have to brake and accelerate, and braking and accelerate causes a loss of energy. So what we want is to flow by not having to brake or accelerate. And this means you can move your core essentially in 5 different ways. And this is what I teach. You can move your core forward and backward, up and down. You can move your core left or right. You can turn it in any direction. And you can also expand and contract your core. And the core is a very small part of your trunk. And the trunk is a manifestation of your spine. Of course, the spine can move in 4 ways: forward, backward, side to side, twisting, lengthening, and shortening. But the trunk can expand and contract. And when you understand expansion, contraction, you also understand breathing as well. So it's important to teach dynamic transitions from the core. And this really connects you with your enteric nervous system that reflects the natural body rhythms. Now, it's important to have a mind-body connection. So breath awareness is useful, but if you focus too much on breathing, it leads to hyperventilation and overtension. So what I say is integrate your mental focus more with blood flow and less with the breath. It gives a better result. I'll talk a bit more about breathing in a moment, but breathing in the beginning for most people is so dysfunctional. The best thing you can get them to do is focus on natural breathing, and then get them to focus on how their body's temperature is. If you can increase body temperature in a cold environment so that the body feels warmer while the environment is cold, that means you're improving blood flow. And if you can improve blood flow without the heart racing, these are the 2 most important things for long-term physiological health. Now, when we're teaching movement patterns, for many people it's very, very tricky. So it's important to start with the simple forms and then gradually increase the complexity as people become more comfortable with the movement and more skilled. Basically, the mind can only focus on 1 or 2 things at once, but the brain rather can focus on only 1 or 2 things at once. So what you want to do is train a cellular intelligence. And the best way of doing that is by ongoing repetition. So there's that fantastic old movie, the Karate Kid, where he said, I want to learn martial arts. And Mr. Miyagi said, no, first paint the fence, first wax the car. And so the idea being that if you want to learn a movement, you have to do it so many times, and the figure is usually around 10,000 times, the same number of times a baby will make a movement until it becomes not a thinking thing, but rather something which happens through the neurological system of the body. And ideally, it happens by getting the thinking brain in the head to work via the action brain or the gut brain at the core and then go to your nervous system. And then the mind can focus on an infinite number of things or millions of things at once, whereas the thinking brain can only focus on a few. So in terms of layering your complexity when teaching, you have to see when has a person achieved the ability to do a particular movement that you've set for them in a way where they're not thinking anymore. And then when they've got that movement where they're not thinking, that's when you add more complexity. And of course, if you're teaching in a group, you have to see what's the approximate base level of that group. My slides keep going forward by themselves. I don't know why.
Hey, Simon, can you
Okay,
hear me
so
there?
let me just check for some reason. Are we all, I think, mute all?
Hey, Simon, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, Carl? Carl, did you want to say something?
Hey, Simon, it'd be great to just to pop back to see your face sometimes. And I
Is my
see you.
face not visible?
I think most people will just be seeing the screen. So, but
Ah,
maybe let us know in chat, everyone. But um,
I'm seeing my face on the screen. Is any, okay, let me
let
see in
us
the
know in
chat.
chat if everyone else. Yeah, you can see Simon. Okay, good.
Okay, it's just you, Carl.
Oh, it's
Okay.
just me. Oh, I'll shut up then. Continue. I
That's all
love
right,
it.
Carl.
Sorry, my man.
That's all right. I'll continue then. Okay, so,
Yeah.
all right. Okay. All right, so in terms of energy efficiency, it's really important that the more you can make people move with minimal effort, and the better it is. You want to prevent unnecessary tension or strain, and this is where I ask people to connect with what I call the bridges between conscious and unconscious. You see, many people talk about breathing as being the link between body and mind, and many people say that you're not really doing yoga if you're not focusing on the breath. But it's not actually the breath that's the link between conscious and unconscious, or the link between body and mind. Rather, it's the diaphragm. And the diaphragm is this place in your body which can be controlled both consciously. You can consciously say, breathe diaphragmatically, breathe into your abdomen, for example. But when you're asleep in your deepest, most regenerative cycle, which is sleeping, it happens by itself. So the link between body and mind is not the breath, it's the diaphragm. And what makes it special is that it's a bridge between conscious and unconscious. But the wonderful thing about that is that there are 11 other bridges which most people can access, more if you're a little bit special. But these other bridges, very simply, I put into 6 groups. And you can put this particular thing into any physical practice. You can say to people, focus on your fingers, check your fingers are lengthened. Can the fingers still move? Move them. Focus on your shoulders. Are the shoulders lengthened apart? Are they relaxed? Can you move them? Do that. Check your neck is lengthened. Is it free? Can you move it? Check your pelvic floor is as relaxed as you can comfortably make it. Then move your pelvis. Obviously, if there's something wrong with your pelvic floor and you have to tighten it, you do. But most people over tighten the pelvic floor and it just acts to cause stress. Put people into flight or fight, disable the diaphragm, and turn off your immune, digestive and reproductive function. So then it's important that you can breathe diaphragmatically and your lower back is lengthened also, and it's important that your face is relaxed. So I'll often tell people to check they can make saliva, check they can talk, move their lips, move their jaw, open and close the eyes, and blink comfortably. And some of these places I've mentioned in the face, we use in modern yoga, we use in traditional yoga, things like Kichadi Mudra for the tongue. There's also jaw activities, tongue activities, activities for the eyes to open and close and gaze. We talk about drishti. So these are very important places. I call them the bridges between conscious and unconscious. And when you get people to relax these places, not only do you unblock the blockages of good energy and loving information through your body, which I call healthy blood flow and a dominance of the parasympathetic nervous system, but also it helps move the blood. So the more effectively blood flows, the better. And what usually blocks it is overtension. And by focusing on these key places to relax, you unblock that tension, allows blood to flow easier. And by moving these places, blood flows better without needing to make the heart race. So this is a really important thing. Now, in terms of teaching breathing techniques, I have a big passion for breath. My father was a free diver. When I was 6, he taught me how to hold my breath and swim the lap of an Olympic pool underwater before I swam on top. So I'm very keen on teaching breath control, but I find that 90% of the people I teach are just not ready for it. And I believe that until you can re-establish natural breathing in the activity that you're doing, there's just no point teaching any more than that. And so natural breathing's got 5 main features. These are: inhalation should be low in your body. In other words, it should be felt like an expansion in your pelvic floor, in your lower back, in your lower abdomen, and your sacrum even. And then inhalation should be low. Exhalation should be passive or gentle, no tension on the exhale. And then the third thing is that the inhalation should be, and exhalation should be through your nose. Nasal breathing is very, very important. And then the fourth thing is it should be as little as you can comfortably breathe for the activity that you're doing. You don't need to breathe more than you can. It actually causes problems if you do. And the fifth thing is that recognize that natural breathing can be done by itself. So one of the ways of inducing natural breathing is by getting people to forget about breathing and focus on something else, which might be important, like relaxing, lengthening. And lengthening and relaxing are really good things, because if you lengthen and relax any part of your body, especially if you do it with a little bit of muscle activity, because to lengthen, say, your fingers, that requires muscle activity. To lengthen your spine, that requires some muscle activity. Passive stretches don't do this, but actively lengthening causes muscles to become active, it causes blood to flow, and at the same time it relieves compression on nerves. So both active lengthening and relaxation of what's not necessary can relieve nerve impingement, which reduces pain straight away. So this is an important thing to focus on. And when you do that, when you really focus in your whole body on lengthen and relax as your mantra, natural breathing happens a lot better. Now, you can do a lot more with breath. And one of the next things I'll do with people's breathing is not get them to move with the breath, but get them to move in a way where you know what the effects of the movement will be on the breath. So a lot of people will say, I'm doing this or that, therefore I should breathe in, breathe out. But actually it causes an imposition on people's breathing and generally makes them overbreathe and overtense. A better thing to do is to understand the effects of movement on the volume of your thoracic cage and how it affects the volume that comes above the diaphragm and around the rib cage. So one thing which is not commonly understood is that if you're standing and you bend your knees and flex the hips slightly, so the front of your hips become a bit compressed, then that will cause a natural exhalation. And if you extend your hips, if you straighten your knees and open the front of the hips, that's going to cause a gentle inhalation, because the front of the hips have the psoas muscle, and the psoas muscle gets very compressed with people who do prolonged sitting throughout the day. So when you extend and flex the hips in a rhythmical fashion, like doing gentle half squat, stand back up, half squat, come back up, that will make exhale and inhale. And not only will this regulate your breathing in a way which does not cause overbreathing, this also regulates heart rate variability. So when I'm going down into a 1/3 squat, maybe a half squat, and coming back to almost locking my knees, my heart rate can rhythmically change from being 45 beats per minute to changing to 75 beats per minute over the space of about 6 seconds. And this is pretty reproducible from the research that I've done. And, I've been doing research for many years now on the body. And a similar effect to this can happen with the shoulders elevating and dropping. So many people are teaching things which just don't make sense anatomically, like when your arms are up in the air, pull the shoulders down. For those of you who know the work of B.K.S. Iyengar or K. Patabi Joyce or Krishnamacharya, you can see from their books and their writings and their videos, when the arms are up, the shoulders go right up past the ears. To pull the shoulders down actually will affect breathing in a negative way. But whenever you lift the shoulders, that will cause an expansion of your thoracic cage, which will cause air to come in. So if you know then what your body is doing, as you move in a different way, it'll start to cause inhalation and exhalation depending on how you move. And this is something which I'd love to teach more of, and I really enjoy teaching it. But for those of you who are not aware of it, I'm happy to show you at a later stage. But you can effectively learn how to move your spine and your trunk in a way that bending forward will sometimes make you inhale, especially if you expand the back of the body. But bending forward will also make you exhale if you contract the front of the body. You can do the same thing with side bends and with twists and with back bends as well. And so it's really important to understand the effects of movement and posture on breathing and use that as a guide to help people breathe, rather than just thinking I'm moving in a certain way, therefore I should breathe in a certain way. So this is something which is very new for some of you, I know, but it's a very important thing to think about. The other thing is you want to guide your people in your classes how posture and movement affects breath rhythm and how it promotes flow and efficiency. So this is part of what I've been saying already, but this is something which really takes some time to learn. In the beginning, the best effect will come if you just breathe naturally, as I've said. Okay, so this next slide is about teaching mindfulness and mental control. So it's important to encourage internal observation. So it's important to guide people in your class, students, to become aware of the sensations, their thoughts and their emotions during their practice. And what we want is not to overdo people's emotions. So again, if you make people follow their breathing, observe their breathing. Why is my screen being scratched? I don't know why. But if you get people to observe the breathing or follow the breathing, often they breathe more than they need. And then the emotions become heightened. So you don't want to overbreathe. Otherwise, emotional sensitivity becomes a problem. It's also important to foster a practice in your students which is non-judgmental. So make them look for good feeling rather than a good look. And it's really important to not say that this posture, this movement, what they're doing is not good, but rather, how does it feel for you? Because in the end, feeling is much more important than how it looks. Then when you are doing meditation, it's important that if you're doing it, that you also focus on more subtle things than the breath. So rather than focusing on breathing, as many people do, I focus on things like the heartbeat or internal exercises where I'm focusing on lengthening and relaxing. That usually gives a better result. And that can be done in static meditative postures, which you might hold for a long time, like a seated cross-legged position or sitting on a chair for meditation. But it also applies in yoga postures as well. And one of the things that I do before a seated meditation is sometimes I get people to chant or hum. And the purpose of this is to give like a significant increase in the amount of nitric oxide flowing through the body. And nitric oxide is a really powerful circulatory enhancer and immune system enhancer. So by getting people to hum simply or chant for a period before they do meditative practices can be very, very powerful. And some people use Ujjayi pranayama, but this often will cause more overbreathing than is necessary. Okay, so parasympathetic dominance is an important part of the practice because what we want is a balanced nervous system. And parasympathetic nervous system is that part of your unconscious or automatic nervous system, which, where is this thing going? Where is it? Don't know why my computer keeps going forward. Parasympathetic dominance is this part of your nervous system, which we call the state of rest, relaxation, rejuvenation, regeneration. And so it's important to always highlight the practices which encourage this parasympathetic dominance. Now, I'm not saying you do that the whole time. It's probably important for most people to give, depending on their aims and their physical, physiological, mental state, their age, etc., between 1 to 10% of the practice time, it's okay to put a little bit of sympathetic dominance. And the sympathetic nervous system is what we call euphemistically the state of flight or fight or fear. And the signs of sympathetic nervous system dominance include increased heart rate, any sense of overbreathing, any sense of stretching, any sense of tension. So parasympathetic dominance should be there most of the time, but for up to 1 to 10% of the time, it's useful to give some people a little bit more than that. So I'm not saying the whole time keep people calm and relaxed. You can, and you still get good results, but they're a little bit slower. But for physiological reasons and often more mental reasons, it's okay to get the heart rate up occasionally, but I wouldn't do it more than 10% of the time. And it's not just me that says this. If you're a Olympic runner going to go for your next Olympics, then most trainers of Olympic runners will say, today you're going to run for 100 minutes, but in that 100 minutes, I only want you running at a pace where you can't talk comfortably for no more than 10 minutes. And that's going to get you to the next Olympics. But if your aim is not to get to the next Olympics, but to get to live to over 100, then maybe only 1% of the time, increasing heart rate, increasing strength or tension will be useful. But 90 to 99% of your dedicated conscious practice time, in your embodied practice, whatever you call it, that should be, I believe, more meditative. And that meditative practice has got 5 key features. A meditative practice, if it's going to be either a static or dynamic meditative practice, look for something which is sustainable, engaging, calming, effortless, but also invigorating. So a meditative practice for me is not one where you just sit or lie in a position where if the temperature is cold, you get cold. Because an important part of the meditative practice, which was shown to be, when I was 17 by my Tibetan Lama, is that you should be able to make blood flow very, very easily. So to sit in a cold room and cover yourself with a blanket because it's cold, to me, that's not meditation. That may be called concentration or relaxation, but good meditation allows blood to flow effortlessly while your heart rate stays very, very low. Some people say this is not possible, but this is exactly what I'm teaching. And what I'm teaching effectively is things which I like as 5 tag phrases, and you can use them if you wish. One is it possible to increase blood flow without the heart racing? The answer is yes, and this is what you can give people if you work the right way. Can you increase flexibility without the feeling of strong stretching? Yes, and this is what you need if you want to get people to practice with a more relaxing effect, because stretch is the step before pain, which is the step before injury. So the more you can get someone into a deeper, more flexible position without the sense of stretch, the better the results and the less injuries. And this is something most people don't appreciate is possible. But if you follow the principles of the practice that I teach, that I was graciously given by my great teachers from all over the world. I believe I teach the common origin of what my great teachers from India, China, Tibet, Japan, and my understanding as a movement-based physiotherapist, I'm trying to teach the common origin of all these things. And one of the key features is that movement should be initially active from the core, with breathing naturally from the core in a fluid way. And when you do active movements from the core, then you can achieve this possibility of flexibility without stretching, strength without feeling tense, blood flow without the heart racing, and a sense of neurological intelligence in your cells without the brain having to overthink. This is important, I believe. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about communication and instructional techniques. So obviously it's very important to have clear, concise cues and use simple language and direct instructions. Now, Mr. Iyengar would tell me, for example, that most students can only understand about 3 or 4 instructions at once. The problem is, who are you teaching? Are you teaching a group or individual people? If you're teaching individuals, it's much, much easier. You can say exactly what that individual needs, provided you've assessed them properly. But if you're teaching a group, then to a certain extent, you have to teach a little bit more about what someone might know, but someone else might not know, because a group is usually mixed. And it's important, I think, that when you're teaching these instructions to people, that you let them know in a group that the first few instructions you're going to give are going to be the most important instructions that maybe some of you have already heard. And then the next instructions will be more complex. And then remind people that there's a certain point where the brain becomes overburdened. So I always tell my students that not everything I say is going to be useful for you. Some of the things I say are only useful for maybe the more experienced people in the class. But then if you're doing this, it's important that you let people know how you're teaching, and you're teaching in this layered fashion. I think it's important to encourage questions and invite dialogue to clarify things like misunderstandings to help support your students' learning process. But there's always a time and a place for questions. So, for example, in this presentation now, I've asked you to not ask questions till the end. And, it depends on what presentation I'm doing. Some I make a little bit less formal, and sometimes questions throughout can be okay. But then you have to be careful not to get distracted. And I think students often imagine when they're listening to a talk, there's a certain type of enthusiastic student who will always want to ask a question, but generally a person who prepares a presentation will anticipate questions. So it's often important to tell people at the start, I want to have a place for questions, but let's do it at the end. And maybe some of the questions that you might have, I may answer before we get to the end. So it's always good to, let people know this and somehow address questions where necessary. And I found that what was necessary for me as a casual class teacher, something which I did for about 20 years, I would only teach, I would mainly teach casual classes and some workshops and teacher training in the 1980s and 90s. But then I'd always be available for my students after class. And this used to cause a lot of problems for the people I lived with, my family. Why is Papa always in the class for another hour afterwards? It's because I want to make sure that my students are okay, that I've addressed their physical, physiological, and mental needs, and also social needs as well. It's really nice to have a space in your school or in your class that people can commune afterwards. And, I think this is really important. We're not just here to help people physically, but there's also the needs of the physical body. Pain-free functional, I think, is enough. Physiological body, healthy blood flow, calm nervous system predominantly, and that encourages the health of immune, digestive, reproductive functions. Mental body, the ability to have happiness as your default natural function, the ability to have a logical thinking brain, but also an intuitive gut brain, so you get a balance between intuition and logic, because that's what reality is actually. It's not just logical, it's a balance between the two. And then also to be able to think clearly, etc. But along with physical, physiological, and mental health, there's social health. So it's really important, I think, to give people a chance after your class to interact, to meet each other, maybe put on events in your school, put on events in your house if you teach from your house, and really get to know people, because for many people, that's the reason they come. They want connection. And I believe when people make good connections and have good social life based on a class they might be coming to with you, whatever you want to call it, then their lifestyle becomes a lot better. Financial health becomes better, and the ability to live long and prosper with a sense of purpose becomes a little bit easier to do as well. Now, I also want to address multi-sensorial teaching. So I don't just teach with words, and I think it's a mistake to just teach with words. Some people think that it's okay just to sit at the back of the room or to walk around the room and just talk when you're teaching. I teach with verbal cues. I also give visual demonstrations, and to a certain extent, depending on the group, I give tactile feedback in the form of adjustments where appropriate. And so verbal cues are important, and you can use them often when you're giving adjustments. And I'll talk a bit about adjustments, but I don't recommend giving full-on hands-on adjustments to most people. I mean, I'm a licensed physiotherapist. I had years at university. I also was a massage therapist for 15 years before doing physiotherapy. And in that time, I really learned how to deal with people's bodies. But the problem is it's very, very easy to adjust someone and injure them. Let me just shut the window because there's a bit of noise outside. So it's important to acknowledge that people do get injured when you adjust them, especially if you put them further than their body can go by themselves. A key principle of my teaching is that I let people only go as far in the beginning into a position as their body will go by itself. So if a person can do a particular shape with their own muscles without the assistance of external forces like gravity, one limb pulling another, or momentum, then it gives a suggestion that if they're pain-free in that active posture, then that probably is a safe posture to put them in. But if you force them into a position that they can't do themselves, that's inviting risk of injury. So rather than physically adjusting people, especially people I don't know, then it's nice to give them what I'll call auric adjustments, because people do want to have some sense of personal connection. So one of the things you can do is walk around the room at certain times, come to individuals in a room, and if you look them in the eye, they feel like you're connecting with them. And then you say to them with a quiet verbal instruction that maybe they only can hear, or an instruction which maybe everyone can hear, which might apply for everyone, like turn your shoulder in or turn your thigh in. So then your hands might gesture around their body in a form of auric adjustment. And usually people will feel this and understand it a lot better than words alone. And of course, you can give physical adjustments. And like I said, I do it, but I never do it to people I've just met. Generally, I want to know people for, many hours, which might mean many weeks, depending on how often they come to classes, before I'll physically touch them in a class. Obviously, you have to have permission. And one of the sentences that I found was very useful was to say to people, and I'm happy for you to copy this sentence, is, throughout this class, I may occasionally come round to assist and or adjust you. Should anything I do not feel right, please let me know. If you don't want to be touched or adjusted, that's fine. Because sometimes touch can cause problems as well. And so there is often problems of litigation, often problems of sexual affront, and it can be male-female, female-male, male-male, female-female, it can be any of these things. So be really careful doing physical adjustments, but there is a time and place to do it. And as I said, if you want to do it, the easiest and safest way to do it is by doing auric adjustments. One of the problems, of course, with doing any adjustments, even these auric ones, is that people tend to feel a little bit left out if, say, you've adjusted every person in the room and you missed one or two. So when you're adjusting, try and be a little bit equanimous. And often if the class is very, very big, it may be better not to adjust at all. And what I'll generally do is give just visual instructions. So visual instructions form at least 50% of my practice. And what I tend to do is divide each session into two parts. The first part I'll call the learning practice, and the second part I call the doing practice. And if I'm teaching something which people might perceive to be yoga, I'll call the first part of the class the learning yoga, and the second part, the doing yoga. And in the learning part, I'll use physical adjustment, maybe. It might be the gentle tactile form or the auric form. I'll also use verbal cues. I'll also use visual demonstration as well. But in this part, when you're talking to them, their heads often are getting overcooked with information. And if you overcook people's heads with too much information, then they become stressed. So then that part, the learning part, is useful to make an imprint on a cellular level to affect the cellular intelligence. But then for at least 1/3 of each session, I'll often just say, okay, forget everything I've said now. Now just copy my movements. And I'll move in a way where they can copy me visually. And sometimes at this point, I'll turn on some music, which can ease people's mind. Music's always very particular for some people. That's a whole story in itself. But I never put music if I'm talking, and I never talk if I've got music usually. And so visual instructions can be enough to guide people, especially if the movements are purely active movements. But if it's movements which include one part of the body touching another, you have to have advised them what to do. Because generally, when one part of the body touches another, you should be offering resistance. So it's not a matter of just, touching one arm against the other. When my arms are touching with one elbow crossed over the other, I'm actually in a position trying to escape from it. And that's not obvious from looking. So it's important at some point to give verbal instruction, but then maybe afterwards let people feel it for themselves. And so the second part of my practice that I teach people usually is always a visually instructed practice. Now, when you're giving visual instructions, it's important to follow a couple of things. One is you need to move slow enough that people can follow you, because not everyone follows movement very easily. Some people can't follow movement at all, which is why it's important. You can't just teach visually. Some people, like my dear friends who work with computers, they need that verbal instruction. Otherwise, they just don't get it. And other people, say, for example, dancers, they don't get the verbal instruction at all. So for them, they need the visual instruction. So a combination of both is very effective. And when you're teaching people visually, it stimulates right brain. Teaching people verbally stimulates left brain. So to get a good result, one of the things that I always get people to do in my classes, and I have done for the last 30 years, is get people as much as possible to turn to face me as the teacher. And I recommend this to all my teacher trainees, is get people to face you. And if you can, turn someone's mat to point towards you as the teacher. And that way they're looking at you with both eyes. Because if they only look at you from the side with one eye, if they're looking with right eye, it only stimulates left brain. If they look with left eye, it only stimulates right brain. And also by looking asymmetrically, you can trigger damage to the eyes or to the neck. Because if you move your eyes in a funny way, you can damage your neck or your nerves. If people's arms are spread out, then turning the head can cause nerve impingement from the brachial plexus all the way down the radial or ulnar nerve. And you can actually hurt someone's neck or arms by simply making their head turn to look at you as the teacher if you're in the middle of the room and they're on the side facing away from you. So I usually will get only the number of people I can in a class to fit in a class such that they can point their mats towards me. And then the other thing is I'll get people to make sure they can see me. So if there's more than 2 rows of people, where usually the rows are staggered, so there's always a gap which people can see me with, I'll need a raised stage. Now I am, for those of you who know me personally, I'm a little bit vertically challenged. Yoda was my cousin. And so what I'll do is usually have a raised stage so people can see not just my face, but they can also see my core, because it's important they see what my core is doing. And I'm often demonstrating either with tight clothes or no shirt, so people can see exactly what my abdomen is doing and what my spine is doing. So I don't recommend demonstrating, for example, with loose, puffy clothes. Otherwise, people won't see what your spine does or what your arms and legs are doing. But often it's important to explain this. I explain to people, I'm not wearing a shirt because I need to show you my trunk, because you need to learn how to move your trunk. Otherwise, people think you're some sort of exhibitionist, which happens, which is fine, by the way. Let me go back for some reason. My screen has gone again. Okay. So the other thing about this is that when you are facing people, mirror image doesn't work. So mirror image is not good if you're facing a group and you're doing something asymmetrical. I'll face the group and demonstrate if something is symmetrical and they can see my front. But if I'm doing something which involves left or right, I'll always face away from people so they can see my left arm is the same as their left arm. And then if you want to, if you're entering a position and you're going to hold that position, you face away from them, lift your left arm, then turn and you can talk to them and their left arm will stay up. That's fine. But to try and face a person and lift up one arm, if you say the arm, they still will not get it right. If you say lift up one arm, that might be better. But often, in a group, and I've seen big groups like where BK Sayengo was teaching 100 people who are usually experienced teachers. And even in the videos that I've seen of him teaching 100 experienced teachers, he's teaching right side twist. Half the people are doing a left side twist. People cannot do mirror image. So also it's important to acknowledge that when you are doing certain positions, it's better to see them laterally. So if you, for example, bend forward from your spine or bend forward from your hips, it looks very similar from the front. But if you give a lateral view, bending forward from the spine is very different to bending forward from the hips. So be conscious of who you're demonstrating to and what position they are in the room to show them something. And sometimes a lateral view is better than a front view. Now, if you can, have someone else demonstrate with you. So usually I get my experienced students or some of my wonderful assistants like Anna or Amalia, who have been traveling the world with me the last year or so. My daughter's been traveling with me for the last year or so, and Anna also. And I thank these two very much. They're in a lot of the instructional videos that I use. And other senior students as well, like David and people like this, and Dennis and Blushka. Thank you very much for all the demonstrations you've done for me. And when someone else is demonstrating, usually I'll get them to do a lateral view and I'll do a front back view and sometimes lateral view. And this makes it much easier then for people to follow. And a practice which is just visually based, provided it's been precursed by some instructions, can be just so much more meditative and give such a much better result and cause a lot less stress. So think about this. Now, I believe that positive reinforcement is very important. It's important to acknowledge people's progress and give some, build confidence and trust. I actually failed my Iyengar Yoga Association training certificate. I got my introductory certificate. I studied with Iyengar about 7 sessions over the period of 10 years, so I probably spent altogether 8-9 months in his presence, and I really had a good connection with him, I felt. But the teachers in his association once said to me, I shouldn't get a certificate because I complimented my students. And they said that, Mr. Iyengar would never compliment your students. And although he was like this, he wasn't always like this. He was actually a really fun, nice, happy man. I really enjoyed his company, and he was often very nice to me. And last time I saw him, he slapped me on my back and said, very good, very good. And he was very positive. And it made me feel a lot better because, it's one thing if you are occasionally critical in the form of giving people criticism to help them improve, but not everyone responds well to it. So be careful how you give people feedback. And that feedback sandwich is always very good. The idea of tell them what they did well, maybe say what could improve, and then say what is still very good. A feedback sandwich, that's an important thing, I think. Okay, when we're talking about structuring classes and workshops, I think it's important if it's a workshop or like sometimes I do these, I love doing these 1 month intensive trainings. They're my most favorite thing. But often now I'm teaching either 1 month or 1 week. Occasionally I do these 3 or 4 day ones, but I've really moved away from teaching one-off classes, much, much less of those now. But I always like to begin with a centering practice. So it's nice to begin a longer session where everyone introduces each other so that people find out who's in the room. People tell me a bit about themselves, what they need, why they're here, a bit about their history. I think that's important if it's a longer training. But then maybe once that initial introduction's been done, give people something which is a meditative practice. It could be something very simple to follow without instructions, maybe a breath awareness practice or something like this. But a bit of ceremony at the start can really help set the tone. It's also important to have, in terms of the structure of your classes, a logical progression. And, this is something which I've been working on for a long time, and being a movement-based physiotherapist is very, very important in terms of how that helped me understand how to work with people's bodies. So having a logical progression, and for me, the most important place to start, as I've mentioned, is working from the core. And so moving the spine through its range of motion, forward, backward, side to side, twisting, that's very important. And then also activating the muscles of your legs and arms before they take heavy weight bearing. In other words, before I do any sort of deep squatting, for example, or one-legged balancing, I'll usually activate the muscles around a leg. And that makes it a lot safer for your knees and for your hips. And this logical progression, there's a lot of depth to that, and I'd love to share it with you in detail for those who haven't had in classes before. It's also important to to vary the pace of the practice. Like having one pace the whole time can be effective sometimes, but what you learn at a slow speed, you master at a slow speed. What you learn at a fast speed, you master at the fast speed. So everything you do will teach you pretty much what you're doing. Some practice carries over, but it's important to vary how you're teaching, how you're practicing. And, it's good to maybe not just give total relaxation after intense work, but maybe just give simpler practices. So you're doing maybe a dynamic practice and then maybe doing a static practice. So it can be a dynamic flow with a static hold in a gentle or firm position, and then more intense work with more relaxed work. But it doesn't have to be intense, then stop. I think that kills the meditation of the practice. Yeah, you can do anything, of course, and sometimes a workshop style class is also okay. And that's what I do in my longer trainings. I'll give people just workshop classes where we stop, start, and learn. But these are not things you can really do in a casual class or a one-off class. It's also important to end every session with some sort of integration. So you have some sort of reflective period where people can be maybe in a relaxation, something where they can calm their mind. It doesn't have to be a supine relaxation. So often what I would do in my casual classes and still in my courses is at the end, get people to either come to a seated, comfortable position, could be seated cross-legged on a bolster, kneeling, or it could be standing. And then I give the option, stay here if you wish for the next 5 minutes, or those who wish, lie down and relax. But don't make lying down the compulsion, because I believe if you're doing a good meditative practice, the effect should be calming anyway. And if you're really doing a relaxation practice, you don't need to relax at the end. So keep this in mind. Okay, so it's very important to address people's individual needs and their differences. So for this, assessment is very important. So I, in my trainings, will give you a whole course on assessment. And when you're assessing people individually, you look at their static postures, also look at them in movement as well, look at symmetrical static postures, symmetrical movements, and then look at asymmetrical postures, asymmetrical movements, and look at things like joint mobility, which parts are moving. For example, you can watch someone walk. How much do their shoulders roll? How much do their hips move back and forth? It tells you a lot about people's spine and their holding patterns. How tight are they holding their abdomen? In the beginning, it's a learned art and you have to spend quite some time. And, it's helpful to observe things like breathing patterns. It's helpful to talk to them to observe their mental state. But as the years go on, I found what happened is exactly what my teachers told me 40 years ago. You can come to the place where you watch people walk into the room, and as they're walking into the room and coming to sit in their mat, you already know so much about them because you've honed your assessment protocols inside your body, and you can really tell so much about a person just by looking at them. And if you can talk to them as well, find a history, that's useful. That's why generally each new person I'll always talk to for as long as I can before a class. Often if it's an online course, I'll get people to fill in some sort of course questionnaire before they come. And then you know something about the people. It's important to know what they want from the practice, but also recognize what they need from the practice. And it's a mistake to think that someone should be just given what they need. They might need to be more flexible and strong. They might say, I want strength and flexibility. But if you give them exercises just to improve strength and flexibility, it's often going to put them off. So look at what people really want. And often what they want is just to feel good. So making people feel good, I believe, is more important than trying to address all of their needs in one go. But you do have to be conscious that if people come there for a workout, to a certain extent, you have to give it to them. I prefer to try and get people's headspace changed a little bit and say, look, a workout is okay, but often it causes long-term stress. Maybe what we need is less work out and more work in. So at the end of a workout, you have less energy, more need for food and sleep, and often more pain. Whereas if you practice in a good way, you can do a work in. And at the end of the work in, you have more energy, less need for sleep, less need for food, and less pain. And this gives you a more functional possibility for the rest of your life. I think that's more sustainable. And as I said, now in my 7th decade, I find that works a lot better, not just for myself, but most of my students. Okay. Now it's important to let people know that not only can you help them adjust and modify postures and movements, but they should also take that choice as well. And so giving a little bit of a spiel about what are ways of making it easier, that really helps people. So suggest, for example, that if I'm doing a movement or a posture, you can bend less, tense less, stretch less, or breathe more naturally, and that will always make it easier. Move slower rather than faster makes it easier. And if it's something which is a one-legged balance, they could, if they want to, hold their hand against the wall to help balance, or just come to the toe tip so they don't need to balance. Or if it's a standing position which becomes too difficult when the knees are bent, bend the knees less. Or if they want to, forget everything from the hips down, sit on a chair and just do the upper body. And if it's to do with arms, for example, many people can't lift their arms above their head. Can't lift your arms? Try and lift the shoulders. Modification and teaching how things can be modified is essential, especially if people have limitations or injuries, or it might not be physical injuries, it might be physiological limitations as well. Sometimes people's energy levels are very, very minimal, and then it's good to back them off from the very, very start and really give people acknowledgement that it's absolutely fine to do that. Okay, so another thing is to encourage sensitivity in people. So don't just get people to be doing something which doesn't hurt. Ahimsa in yoga, sometimes people translate as non-violence, whereas the prefix ah doesn't mean non, it really means opposite of. So it's not enough to say be non-violent, it's the opposite of violence, be gentle. So it's not enough to say I'm not hurting. Actually look for feeling good in the practice. And when you're looking for feeling good, don't just look at the physical feeling good, also look at the physiological signs. So pain is obviously a physical sign of not feeling good, but then dizziness, nausea, discomfort in other ways can be physiological signs of not feeling good. And if you make people overthink, that gives a mental not feeling good as well. So I often say to people, we need to try and encourage the flow of good energy and loving information inside the body as a model for how we are in our life. And the way we do it inside our body is by encouraging blood flow in a healthy way where the heart rate's not, racing, and by keeping a dominance of the parasympathetic nervous system. If you make that the aim of the practice, then what we have to do, the next step, is to stop blocking that. And the step for not blocking that is to tense less, stretch less, breathe less, think less, eat less eventually. And these things normally block good energy and loving information. And then you have to encourage the flow of good energy and loving information. And these things I mentioned before, like moving from your core, breathing from your core, moving actively initially at least, not using external forces like one limb pulling another or momentum. They can come later, but not initially. And then taking this to be a model for how you live your life. Because if you finish your practice and you're completely exhausted because you've done an intense workout, how much do you want to help other people? But if you finish your practice and you're happy and you're energized and you're calm, you want to share that with other people. And I think that's what makes the world a better place. So encourage people to not just be looking for no pain, look for all the things that make them feel good, physically, physiologically, and mentally. And then finally, it's important that if you have students or clients who you can't help, you realize that you're trying something, it's not working, either you don't know, or they're not responding to you, or they're just not responding to the way you're teaching them, or they're not working well with the students in your class, do not hesitate. In fact, I really encourage you to refer them on to other people. It might be referring them on to another teacher, or maybe referring them to a specialist, might be a medical practitioner, could be a physiotherapist, could be a psychologist or a social worker. Don't hesitate to refer people. If you persist with one person in a class and they take too much energy, they will detract from the people in your class who are not taking so much energy. So keep this in mind. It's important to recognize who's in your class and who you can help and who you can't help without, compromising everyone in the room. Okay, so I believe that we're all beginners. I'm a beginner. I'm learning every day. I learn by being here with you. I'm learning in every class that I teach. I learn from my children. Everyone's your guru. And what we want is to stay continuously learning. So I'm always reading research papers. I'm always going to conferences, and where I can, I'll go to other people's classes and learn about things, not just traditional things. Like I love reading recently translated papers from India or China, which were not available in my language before. I love reading these things and finding out new tips. I love learning from other teachers, but I also look to research in biomechanics and physiotherapy and physiology and medical science, because these are the things that can help you become a better teacher for yourself. That's number one, and for other people. Never stop practicing. If you stop practicing, then you stop really having the key to teaching. Your own personal practice is the best thing you can do to help you teach. And if you've given up your practice, if you can't practice in a sustainable way, then how are people supposed to follow you? If you won't even attend your own class, why would you expect other people to attend it? So I practice in a way which is sustainable. And although I'll walk around the room and assist people where I can and guide people off the mat, like I said, a significant part of my practice is giving, actually demonstrating me doing something which doesn't necessarily look impressive, but I try and look like I'm having a good time. That's most important, I think. And so keep learning, and also get mentorship. It's important to learn from other experienced teachers, to share your insights with peers, also discuss with your students. Having a community is very, very important in your teaching career. Okay. Also, it's important to have a reflective approach to your practice. So videotaping you teaching can give you a chance to see how you sound. Are you audible? Even putting an iPhone or any sort of Android phone, I don't have to be Apple elitist, but if you put a recording device on the opposite side of the room, turn it on. Can you hear yourself teach? Because many people just are not loud enough. You will not be effective if people cannot get your teaching. They need to hear you. They need to see you. An important thing which people don't realize is that if you're in a room with a window, if the window is directly behind you, people will not see you. If you have a light source behind you, your face is in shadow, your body's in shadow. So, sometimes I teach in very beautiful environments where there's a window opening up to a beautiful landscape. And so my hosts will often put my mat right in front of that window. And I come along and I take the mat and I put it on the opposite wall. And people say, but we won't be able to see the view. And I go, well, they're not really here to see the view. They can look at that before and after class. In the class, I want them seeing me. Don't have a backlight. That's my suggestion if you want people to actually learn from you. Okay, so the other thing is it's important to be sensitive to honor the origins of your practice and integrate them respectively. So if you're teaching something which you learned from someone else, acknowledge it. And in my various papers, in my various videos and online work, you see me talk about all the teachers that I've had, almost every one of the interviews, and I've done hundreds now, online, podcasts and interviews where I go through the list of all my teachers to acknowledge them. It's really important to acknowledge lineage. I feel like I've invented nothing. All I've done is I've collected. And what I collected from all the great teachers I've had for the last 55 years is I've synthesized it in a way where I'm taking the most important points, which are the important points which resonate with everyone. And I believe it's the common origin of all posture, movement, breathing, and mental control for health, happiness, and longevity. Okay, so here's a couple of practical tips, and I'll be finishing shortly. Practical tips for online and in-person teaching. If you're teaching in person, make sure you've got a safe physical space. Make sure you've got clear visibility and provide hands-on assistance where appropriate. If you're teaching online, make sure you've got good, clear camera angles, stable internet, simple background, and consistent audio. And what I found with that, I did a lot of live online teaching before, during the COVID times, whereas before that, I've been teaching online since 2001. But what I did was always pre-recorded work. And generally still in the world of limited internet, unstable internet, I find if I'm actually teaching, unless I have the very rare possibility of having a full-on camera crew, I don't teach physically with the camera in front of me, except on occasion. If I'm teaching a large group, then what I do is I pre-record the teaching part, which might be, say, a half an hour or 1 hour physical practice. And then I'll meet people before and afterwards and talk to them like I'm talking here now. So people can clearly see me, clearly hear me. But when it comes to actually teaching physical posture and movement and breathing, you want to have good audio, you want to have also good lighting, and you want to be able to zoom in close or move far away when someone's body gets bigger or smaller. And that's very hard to do with modern technology if you're working one-on-one. So keep this in mind. Now, it's also important to engage your students. So what I do is I use question and answers. I often do polls, for example. Surveys are very, very useful. I took a poll last week and 100% of people agreed they didn't like it that the tent fell down. That's just a stupid joke to see if you're still awake, but carry on if you like. So it's important to have group discussion and also exercises in pairs. So sometimes even in groups where I'm not teaching teacher training, I'll get people to teach an exercise to each other because it helps them remember how they would teach it to themselves. So that's quite a fun exercise for groups. I treat everyone who's interested in practicing for themselves as a teacher because they've got to have at least one student, which is themselves, in a class. And also it's important to encourage your clients, your students, to do a home practice. So at some point in each class, I'll say to people, this particular exercise you can do whenever you like. So one of my favorites is to say to people, move your fingers, practice doing this. Or maybe when you're at the supermarket, bend your knees slightly, drop your hips, lengthen your lower back, like you've dropped your sitting bones, like they're a weight on a string, which is your spine, so you can lengthen your lower back, relax your abdomen, breathe into the abdomen. And I encourage people to do this at supermarkets. I encourage people to move their lips, their jaw, to kiss and smile. And that should be encouraged in buses and trains as well. It does light people up a little bit, but really a take-home practice of any sort is important. So if you give something which people can learn a little bit, take home, it's very, very good. And often just picking part of your class, that's the best thing to do. It's really great, for example, to tell people to just simply spend a couple of minutes each day rolling their shoulders. It's so simple. In yoga, we call it Pavanmuktasan, but simple joint synergy practices like this can be so effective. I gave it to my 80-year-old father-in-law some years ago, and after rolling his shoulders for a couple of minutes, he stopped, stunned, going, oh my God, I can think. And he'd been on dialysis 3 times a week up until that point. But just by simply rolling his shoulders, this 80-year-old man could suddenly get clarity in his brain. That was a real eye-opener for me, that something as simple as that, something that everyone can do throughout the day, can make such a difference to your health, happiness, and longevity. Think about this. Encourage people to do practice at home. Okay, so balancing tradition and innovation. I've already said it, honor your lineage, say where people came from. And if you are innovating and introducing new approaches, make sure that you've got some evidence as to why you're saying it. Is it based on your personal exploration? Is it based on the student's needs? And what I did was I acknowledged that basically we are normal people living in a very unnatural world. So although I honor the lineage of what people taught me from Tibet and China and India, the teachers I had, most of them were brought up in places where they were 20 or 30 years old before they ever sat on a chair. So it's really important to know that these people have got natural bodies, whereas most of the people we're teaching in the modern world today, and for me that includes people in Asia. I've just come back from a trip to Asia, and I went to 4 Asian countries, and I found that even people living in India, for example, who used to be living 30 years ago, squatting to go to the toilet, sitting on the floor to eat, most of them are now sitting on chairs. So once you sit on chairs for, 5 to 15 hours a day for 10 or 20 years, your body is no longer natural. You've got so many problems, stiffness in the hips, yes, but also stiffness in the spine, and also often over tightness in your core that causes digestive, immune, and reproductive function. And you don't need to add to this stress. You can help remove it by telling people to release their pelvic floor, to let the abdomen relax, maybe suggesting people might walk around with less tight clothing in everyday life, because for many women, obviously, there's this shame in letting the abdomen go. But for so many people, especially women, I've seen the effect very, very pronounced. Relax your abdomen, relax the pelvic floor. More people need this. And on many occasions, I've had people do this and restore fertility when it had been gone for a while, improve menstrual function. So sometimes there was amenorrhea, dysmenorrhea, and it all becomes better just by simple things like letting your core be the place you move from, relaxing your pelvic floor, moving from the core. So then focus on the core principle. The core principle, if you're doing something which is more traditional movement, you're basing it not just on strength and flexibility. Don't just make the practice focus on stretch and tension. Leave that to the stretch classes, leave that to the strengthening classes. Focus on something which will give a meditative effect, so it's good for the present moment and makes you feel healthy and happy while you're doing it. Gives you a good effect immediately afterwards, makes you still feel good the next day, and then also in the long-term future, you are working. So this gives you health, happiness, and longevity. And it's also important, I was mentioning before about pain. Get people to monitor their pain levels, but also get people to remember that if the pain comes the next day, then often this is a sign that the pain was inhibited during the actual practice that made them painful the next day because they were secreting endorphins, the body's endogenous morphine. If you enter a state of flight or fight in your practice by overstretching, overtensing, overbreathing, overthinking, making the heart race, oversweating even, then what happens is no practice hurts. It feels amazing. You go on a pranic high, a yoga high, a runner's high. But these things have the effect of cocaine, caffeine, marijuana, heroin inside the body. Of course you feel good. Of course you feel no pain until these endogenous drugs wear off and the next day you feel pain. So really consider this, that if you're really working in a way which is going to encourage health, happiness, and longevity, it shouldn't hurt while you're doing it, and it shouldn't hurt the next day either. And I think most of you on this call have done my practices and my trainings before, and most people will acknowledge that even after working what seems quite intensively, because sometimes in the trainings we might be doing 6 to 8 hours of movement and posture each day, but we don't get sore, yet people improve. You really do develop strength and flexibility without tension or stress. Those things are a sign of problems. Okay, so it's important to inspire your students, and my father, who was my first teacher, would say to me, lead by example. He said, I would never take, he was an army man, no? He was a captain in the army. He'd say, son, I never let men do what I wouldn't do for myself. So it's one thing to tell people to do a particular position, but usually before you make them to do something difficult, at least show that you can do it or demonstrate that it's possible in some way. And although I'll still teach some things that I can't do now, but I used to do when I was younger, I still never teach what I could never do. And keep that as a good guide. Don't teach what you don't know. It might make you look impressive, but you're asking for trouble. So lead by example. Also express enthusiasm and compassion. It's really important to be genuinely caring, and I think teachers that survive are the ones that actually do it because it's enjoyable. And like, I'm the worst advertiser. Some of you know that I don't advertise things very well. And often, I have courses which other people organize, like Anna, who assists me, organized a beautiful workshop with David in Slovenia. We had 60 plus people. Wonderful. I organize a workshop in the Philippines and 4 people come. Why? Because I forgot to tell people. But the thing is, I could have cancelled it because it actually cost us more money in airfares. But I went because those 4 people are important to me. And I knew also that we're going to have a good time. So if you have a sense of enjoying your own practice, that's the key to make it fun for other people as well. So if you work with these paradigms, these outdated paradigms of no pain, no gain, survival of the fittest. If you're good, you're going to go to heaven. If you're bad, you're going to go to hell. There's no free lunch. These are the paradigms that will be coming out in the way you teach. And it's not going to make it like you're enthusiastic about your practice. Because if you're working like that, you're going to encourage other people to work like that. So I tell people, make it feel like you're in a warm bath being massaged by someone who loves you. Then people want that. But of course, you have to know the techniques. So some of you I've worked with already before, and you know these techniques. I'd love to share more with you, of course. For those of you who don't know it, I've got so much to share, and I've got many courses coming up, including an online teacher training starting in January. I'm also doing 1 month in May in Italy, 1 month training in Goa, India in October, and I'm also doing two 1 week retreats in India in February, March, which will be intensive retreats if you want to do them intensively, or gently if you want to make them gentle. I'll tell you more about them later. It's important to also foster autonomy. So by teaching people to be teachers of themselves. So all these principles that I'm giving you as to how you could teach other people are also the same principles for how you can teach yourself. And this is something which you can then give to your students, empower students to trust themselves, to explore, to be evolving in their own personal practice. So let me give you the conclusions, which are also my conclusions. Make your practice safe, inclusive, evidence-based, and compassionate. Invite people to study further by getting them to do continuing further learning. And I invite you to come and learn further with me if you can, to attend my workshops online or in person, my retreats. You can contact me whenever you like and I can help you. But I'm asking you that if you want to help your students be a better teacher, this is what you have to do with them as well. You have to give them also your websites, your online resources. Everyone should have some at this point, and also how to connect for deeper learning opportunities. So this is something I want to give you, but also I encourage you to give other people. So I want to say thank you, and I'm going to get you to do some discussion now, which I also ask you to do with your students. And I'll get you to also see what I'm doing, and you should do that with your students, and also tell other people how to stay in touch with you. So at the end of each workshop or each training or each class, it's good to don't forget to collect people's contact details. Otherwise, you've got no one to tell people what you're doing. So very quickly, I'm doing more certified trainings this year. I'm doing January beginning of my online 200-hour teacher training, which will be live and pre-recorded. We'll have about 50 hours, probably more, because each session will be 2 hours of Zoom trainings, which will be live, and you can ask lots of questions, and lots of pre-recorded, hundreds of hours of pre-recorded, but I called it a 200-hour training. Then I've got a training in Byron Bay, which now has become full. But I do other trainings in Australia every few months. So I do 1 week trainings at my house, which are really fun. I'm also doing a retreat in Brisbane in a couple of weeks' time, a couple of months' time actually, which you can come to if you live in Australia. That's going to be really fun. And I'm also doing 2 7-day retreats, or if you want to, you can come and do full 15 days in Goa, India, from the 19th of February to the 5th of March. I'm really looking forward to that. It's a fantastic place opposite the beach in Mundaram, North Goa. Then I'm going to one of the most favorite retreat centers in the whole world, which is Yoga in Salento. And if you say that you've been on this video and you ring Yoga in Salento, I think they can give you an extra discount on the accommodation. And contact them, but say that you came on this video and I said that is there a special discount you can get, and Francesca will accommodate you. She's such a wonderful host there, and it's a fantastic, beautiful center in South Italy, and I'm doing a 300-hour training there. If some of you have never trained with me before, or you only want to do 200 hours, I can accommodate that. You can even just come for 1 or 2 or 3 weeks if you wish. But what I'll be doing in my 2 main trainings this year is doing 300-hour trainings. I'm actually interested in training everyone, but the people I'm most interested in training with, the ones I have the most fun with, are the ones like many of you on this call who are experienced teachers already, who've done 20 or 30 years already, and you want to take that step further. So 300-hour training gives you an opportunity to go that little bit further. And for those people, I'll give you access to a lot of online material as well as the 200 hours we do personally. After the May training in Italy, I'm doing a week beautiful intensive in Berlin, which I love, with wonderful Nika who's hosting me there, and then I'm doing the intensive training in Goa, and that's in October. Then I'm also going to Sri Lanka, and I do for the third year in a row wonderful Lanka yoga to do a lovely training there. That's a brilliant place. And then I do an 80-hour intensive training in Bangkok. I've got lots of other training, including I'll be going to the Philippines. I'll also go to South Africa. I'm also going to go to Sweden and different places in Europe and London, but I'll tell you about them later. So what I'm going to do now is stop my sharing and offer people the possibility that if they want to, they can maybe ask me a question and I can discuss a little bit. If you want to go, feel free to go and I'll send you the recording. Marcos has raised his hand and wants to ask something. So if you want to unmute yourself, you can tell me what you want to say and I'll try and answer fairly, briefly if possible.
Thanks, Simon. First of all, I want to contribute that if anyone hasn't taken these long trainings with you, they really, really, really should go for it. And perhaps everyone here has some experience with your class, but I just want to say how still it is affecting me a year and a half later, and this training the practice keeps evolving with me every day. And thanks for being available for questions and all that. Now, what I wanted to ask, and perhaps is of interest to people who already try to teach your method, is how would you give a short description of, say, synergy? Because so imagine that I have some hours in a local studio where I managed to arrange with the owner that we're doing some synergy classes, like open casual synergy classes. And the people I meet are like, okay, what is that? How can I give them a short explanation of what that includes without having to give them the whole 30-minute lecture on all the things that,
Yes.
So that's my question.
Okay, so it's a good question, Marcos. And the thing is, it always is time dependent. How much time do you have to talk to people and how long they're going to be with you for? But for me, synergy, and this is something that the term synergy was coined with my dear friend Bianca Matchless, who's also a movement-based physiotherapist like me. And we founded Yoga Synergy over 30 years ago to be the synthesis of everything we learned from our traditional teachers in India, with the understanding we gained as movement-based physiotherapists, and also we've both got other degrees in human biology as well. So for us, that was the synergy. So the simplest way of saying what synergy is to other people is to say this is traditional movement with an understanding of modern medical science. And I find that's the quickest way of explaining to people. And that way, if people see you do a movement which is a little bit unfamiliar, provided you've done a little bit of a training with me, as you've done, a lot more than a little bit, you can then say, I'm doing this for this reason, and you can say to people, the reason why we're also including modern medical science understanding as well is because the modern body is no longer natural. So natural movements are not something you can directly put. Yoga movements, for example, which come in yoga textbook, were designed for a natural body. So if you just put people into a yoga posture and they've got a normal body, which is one that's been sitting on chairs for a long period of time, you're going to cause damage. So I think that's the quickest answer, because for me, depending on who I teach, some people go, oh, yoga synergy or synergy, that's the sequence that Simon taught me. It's not the sequence. And some people go, oh, Simon's teaching 5-dimensional flow. It's not the 5-dimensional flow. What I call everything that I'm teaching, to try and give it a term, I call it 5-dimensional synergy flow, or 5-dimensional flow, or yoga synergy, depends who I'm teaching. But depends on where I'm going. For example, I was just in Valencia a few weeks ago. They wanted me to teach Ashtanga yoga. So I taught them Ashtanga yoga. A few years ago, I went to teach on a Bikram yoga teacher training course. And then I taught Bikram yoga. But each time I teach them with the understanding that they may have learned from a great teacher like the Ashtanga gurus or the teachers of Bikram yoga. But I say, That was fine for those teachers, but you have a natural, no longer have a natural body. You've got to take your normal body into account. And if you're coming here to learn to be a teacher, then I need to give you assistance as to how you have to understand that most people will not work if you give them this instruction or this movement because they haven't got natural bodies anymore. So I think as a very quick answer, you can say that this is synergy. It's traditional yoga for the modern body, or it's traditional yoga with an understanding of modern medical science. Thank you. Mirka raised a hand, and I'll ask Mirka to say something. So what would you like to say? Unmute yourself. Asked to unmute. No, you have to find the little button to say unmute. But we'll come back to you in a second, unless you want to write it down for me. Or would someone else like to ask a question in the meantime? Okay, Liz has raised her hand. There's someone else. So you can talk to me, and then Mirka come back.
Hi.
Hi, who's that now?
Hi, Simon. Liz.
Hi, Liz. Thank you. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm in the dark with the fireplace,
No
so
problem.
it's nighttime here.
Thank you.
But my question, I don't know if it's a question, I just wanted your feedback. I've done yoga for 18 years and I've always had a strong practice, and then I realized I was strong as in I would practice every day for 2 hours. And then I realized it was really connected to my marijuana use. When I tried to quit marijuana, my yoga practice just went totally all over the place. And that was a few years ago. And now I'm just trying to, I'm still picking up the pieces. But the thing about smoking was I would just get so in my body and I would know exactly where all the pain was. And I would just immediately start doing yoga. There was no hesitation. And now I have, when I'm sober, I still have the hesitation and the procrastination. So that's pretty much what I want feedback on. Yes. I know that marijuana is the anti-inflammatory, and I know that it does do that. Mm-hmm. But, there are other reasons why I wanted to quit, mostly to do with short-term memory. And any feedback would be great.
It's a very, very good comment. I really appreciate the list, because actually I did a whole talk with wonderful Karen from Om Trips, who thankfully advertises all my training. She's fantastic. So she's done a podcast which is going to be released shortly, which I'll tell you all about. And it was specifically on drugs. And, we talked a lot about the use of marijuana and use of psychedelics, and they definitely have a role. And the thing about marijuana is that it enhances cellular communication. So over the years, I've used marijuana in different ways. Often if I'm taking it nowadays, I will take it orally. So it's pure THC. And you really do feel immediately that you can connect. Like I become like a psychic surgeon and go, okay, flex and slightly laterally flex at L5, S1, and laterally flex to the left at L3, L2. And you become like a psychic surgeon. And I'm sure you've felt that, you become very good and you really want to practice. You want to feel your body. Mm-hmm. Now, some people will get a similar effect by practicing very intensely. And I've got many friends, some of whom are very experienced Ashtanga yoga practitioners, who gave up things like heroin and turned to intense yoga. And what they did was they worked hard. To me, it's over tension, over stretching, over breathing. But that triggers the release of these drug-like effects inside the body, which is cortisol, adrenaline, which are like coffee and cocaine, and endorphins, which are like endogenous morphine. And by over-breathing, you actually get a marijuana effect, because it takes you out of your head, because it reduces blood flow to the brain, and into your body, because it hypersensitizes the nervous system. So that's one approach you could take and just begin your practice, for example, by chanting or singing. And on my YouTube channel, I can direct you. Maybe you want to write to me, and I'll direct you to some of the practices where I begin by 20 minutes of chanting. And while I'm chanting, or humming, if you want to hum instead of chanting, if it's against your religion to chant for some people, you just hum. What it does is it increases nitric oxide, and it also gives a bit of hyperventilation, which helps in that cellular communication. Then once you've got the communication, you can go back to natural breathing, and then you're in your practice. So consider this, because what you're doing I don't think is wrong, But if that's the only way you can practice and it's causing dysfunction in your life, then it's good you stopped it for a while. But certainly it's a very common feeling, and it's certainly one way of getting into a practice, but there are other ways. And the simplest other way I can recommend is by doing a practice which includes chanting at the start. And that's part of what I call mind synergy in the five-dimensional flow practice that I teach. And on the long courses that we do, we chant for maybe 30 minutes first, and then we sit for a little bit and then engage in the practice. And it really embodies people, gets people out of their head into their body, and you start feeling things. So I hope that helps. Thank you very much. And maybe I'll move on. Does anyone else like to have a question? I've got a few that I can get at the bottom here, which people have written. Let me see, but I've got to. So Mirka's going to try again and ask me something. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Simon. Morning, or evening. It's
Yes.
morning here.
Morning to you. Good.
Yeah, settings were off, so I couldn't unmute
It's okay.
myself.
No
So sorry for that.
That's okay.
I was just wondering, I am 6 months postpartum, so my practice nowadays is quite limited because I can feel that my body is not fully ready for full practice.
Yes, yes.
And I am really interested in your trainings, and the easiest for me would be in Italy, but I am not going to be able physically to be there and meet you. So I was wondering if you have an idea, if maybe in 2026 you might be offering again a training in Europe.
I'd like to say so. I'd like to think that I'm going to come back for the next few years and train again in Italy and in India. These are my favorite places. I would love it if people came to Australia, but realistically, I live a long way away from some of my favorite people in the world. And I've had a few wonderful students like dear Anna, who assists me on the courses so capably. She came twice from Slovenia to come and work with me in Australia, which was absolutely fantastic. And she's going to come and do another one soon, which is really great. But most people, it's very difficult to keep traveling around the world and come visit me here. So I'd like to think, yes, I'll be there in Europe again in 2026. But I thought I was going to be in Europe in 2020, and it didn't happen.
I can imagine it.
Because of COVID. So we're in a very uncertain world. So all I can guarantee is the things I'm actually doing. I can make a concerted effort to try and come, but you never know what the world will be doing in a couple of years' time. So if you can, try and come to one of the ones I'm doing next year. Even if you come to the first week of a training, then you can get on to the following week. So some of my students have come to week 1 of a training in 1 year and then did week 2 of a training the following year, and something like that. Or they repeat week 1. But each time, even if you repeated the first week twice, you get something new out of it. So think about it.
I was more thinking maybe about the Berlin one. So that would be amazing. Okay. Thank you very much for your time and all your knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mirka. Amira, you want to say something?
Yeah, hello. I'm really sad that the one in Australia is already full, because I was a bit slow then in booking in.
But you've been before, Amira. You've been before to my training. So what I've got for you,
I got a lot out of it. Yeah.
It was really fun to have you there this time. So if you want to, I contact me offline, and I've got one person who's only coming to the first 2 days, which I wish I hadn't said yes to in the beginning, because it would have been better if she could have done the whole thing. But that means you could come to the last 5 days if you want to, and I'd love to have you, because you've done enough.
I did the first 5 days before.
Yeah, well, so you come first.
Yeah, thank you. I'll send you a message. So you're not going to be doing any sort of teacher training in Australia, so to do the teacher training course, we have to travel to one of the other countries?
I have a modular approach, Amira. I teach people in a group, but when I'm teaching people in a group, I'm also teaching people individually. So, one set of, I'll give, say 10 instructions in a particular activity. And I know that the first 3 instructions are for the new people. The middle 3 instructions are for the people who've been coming a couple of times. And the last 3 instructions are only for the experienced people. And then I'm really aware of what people are picking up and what they're not picking up. So, for example, I can give you a teacher training certificate if you come to me and you do a total of 200 hours, which might be in Australia, or it might be part in Australia, part online. In the end, I don't think anyone really with a real interest in this is interested in a certificate or a piece of paper. It's the understanding.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
always teaching. You saw the way I taught last time. Even though some
yes.
people were just there to learn for themselves, I'm interested in teaching people how to teach themselves. And hopefully from this seminar, you can see that the methods you use to teach others are also the methods you have to use to teach yourself. So come whenever you like, and we can organize a training schedule in Australia as well. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
So who else would like to say something? Nicholas.
Hey Simon,
Hi.
thanks for the talk. Appreciate really much the time and the wisdom you're sharing.
So pleasure.
Brother, my question, so currently I'm in Bali studying with two Ashtanga teachers, and I really feel like the Ashtanga practice kind of like a lifelong path, especially on the physical side, really aligns with meditation practice or Vipassana. Like it really helps me to sit for longer periods of time. And I remember my first Vipassana course, had to sit in a chair, and now I'm able to just sit with a cushion and actually sit comfortably. On the other side, and here my question comes, I'm very much interested into all the physical aspects. I mean, you might heard of the movement culture. So right now I'm totally committed to the Ashtanga yoga and dive deep into it. But I also can see there's a lot of interest into exploring other stuff like gymnastics,
Yes,
and so on, sport and dance and martial arts. And because the day only has 24 hours, and there's other things to do as well. So what's your take on balancing certain practice where you might, like, I have the feeling it's kind of a lifelong practice, but maybe it's also a current snippet of what I perceive right now in this very moment. So maybe you can share some of your journey of how you engage into practices, especially from the physical aspect, and how it's changed, and how can you balance your long-term interest into the day-to-day practice.
Can I ask how old you are, Nicholas?
I'm 32.
32. Okay, up until about 45 years old, I used to do 108 Viparita Chakrasana, 108 backflips in a row, and I think my record was in 5.5 minutes. And it was fun. And, I had lots of fun physical tricks that I could do when I was younger. But what I found was as the years went on, life takes its toll. There's a few things that I did in my practice that caused me injury. Like one time doing Ashtanga yoga, I jumped into Ardha Baddha Padma Paschimottanasana, which is harder to say than do, but it's a half lotus forward bend for those that don't know it. And as I was trying to jump back out of it or lift back out of it, I was lifting back to a handstand. And as I lifted back out of it, my heel was underneath my ribs and I pulled one of my ribs out. It was very painful. But this was one of the very few yoga-based injuries that I ever had. But what I found was that life takes its toll. So me, like people like Iyengar, he injured himself in a motorbike accident when he was quite old, And so I've injured myself. The last major one was doing a television commercial, because I used to do performance and sometimes television things. And so I fell off some scaffolding head first 10 or 12 years ago, and I fractured both my hips, damaged my shoulders, damaged my neck. I also broke my arm in several places, like that was not good. And then over the years, I have managed to damage or break every joint in my body. And the only one I didn't break really was my right elbow. But what happened in the last 2 years was I tore my right biceps. And, all of these things happened mostly as a result of life injuries. The question I asked myself was, why wasn't I healing as well as I thought? And what I realized was that to a certain extent when you're growing up, and up until 18 years old, your body's regenerating all the time. But after 18, your body stops regenerating. You can still heal to a certain extent, but what we need to take attention to is that you're always encouraging the health of your immune, digestive, and reproductive functions. And what I found I was doing was I was working too much with a workout type mentality, and that was disabling my immune, digestive, and reproductive functions. So then my joints were just not recovering. And also I found that, so that I've changed in the last 20 years. Now I work much more with sustainable practices that are more balanced. It's also important to vary your practice. And for example, in the Ashtanga Vinyasa system, the people I know who did the best were the ones who weren't just practicing first series. They practiced first, second, third, fourth series. By doing that, then they're doing a varied practice each day. If you do the same practice over and over again each day, it has limited benefits. Our bodies tends to be asymmetrical. So if you do the same thing every day, you're also making the same asymmetry mistake every day. And that can be okay once or twice, but you do the same mistake every day for 10 years. That can cause long-term damage. So one of the ways you get by that is by varying your practice. So I find the Ashtangas you did many different sequences did better, but also if you add to the practice. So like, for example, you were saying, explore a bit of gymnastics, a bit of dance, a bit of martial arts. This is a good thing to do. So don't just make your only physical activity Ashtanga yoga. You know, my feeling is that the way most people practice Ashtanga yoga, it's too much stress. If someone is naturally flexible, and I've got many friends who are like this, who just do it so effortlessly. You know, I met Sharat, who was, you know, the grandson of Patabi Joyce, for those who don't know, who very sadly recently passed away. I met him when he was 17. And he's a beautiful young man, and his practice was very nice, but mostly it was gentle. He would never force the practice. Whereas I think in the West, we're too end goal orientated. You know, it says in the Bhagavad Gita, don't be attached to the fruits of your actions, rather be engaged in those actions themselves. Don't be attached to either success or failure, but don't become attached to laziness either. And it's doing your best, subject to not becoming aggressive, especially in your mind, that gives you the balance that we call Tarantara Yoga. And that's written in the key part of the Bhagavad Gita. But I think in the modern world, we hear things like it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. But too many people, especially in our youth, are focusing too much on what it looks like and not enough what it feels like. So if you can, think about what I've said about see if you can increase flexibility without stretch, strength without tension, blood flow without the heart racing. Make it so the practice is a lot more gentle. And you know, when I first learned with Patabi Joyce, we would do 8 breaths of posture, and the 8 breaths was slow. So full primary series took us 3.5 hours. But then as the practice became more contemporary, more popular, then suddenly they tried to fit the practice into 1 hour and 15 minutes, which just made the whole thing hyperventilation. And to his credit, Sharat said, don't worry about the breath, just breathe naturally. But still people are forcing the breath, and this causes massive tension on your immune, reproductive and digestive system, and massive imbalance then in terms of the balance between physical health and physiological and mental health. And then it impedes on your social health as well if you get up and you're completely exhausted and can't do things. You know, you want to make it so your practice is going to enhance your life, not make it worse. The other thing I have to say about this is that I think part of the reason why my biceps tore, and one of my dear friends, you might have heard of him, Rolf Neujahant, who was a beautiful Ashtanga teacher in Goa, India, who I actually met before he started doing Ashtanga in 1985. We used to practice on the beach together in India. And he, a few years ago, had happened to him what happened to me recently, which was the biceps tendon just tears. And part of this, I think, is because Ashtanga is too much pushing and not enough pulling. And as you get more experienced and you develop flexibility, you can also use Ashtanga practice to pull, like you pull against your heel, pull. But if you pull against your heel and create stretch, you damage your back. So many people sensibly don't do that. But eventually when you go past the stretch, so the practice is not about stretching and more about activating muscles and actually activating the lengthened muscle, not the muscle, and not working on stretching muscles, then you can get much better benefits. And then the pulling is balances the pushing action of the push-ups, and then you get much better action in the shoulder. Otherwise, you're going to get problems. You know, and even modern people like Dylan Werner, who was someone who was very sweet and came to introduce himself to me at a festival a few years ago, said that he was really happy he bought my book on anatomy physiology of yoga, and he realized the importance of balancing all his handstand work, which he's very good at, by doing weight training. So he does, daily weight training with biceps curls and stuff like that. Otherwise, there's just imbalance, because the Ashtanga Vinyasa practice wasn't meant to be done for your whole life. But for many people, the only practice they can do is Ashtanga limited first series, and that becomes imbalanced. This is part of a major conversation, Nicholas, so we can go a lot further. But just be careful that what you're doing is sustainable. And sustainable doesn't mean you can do it now. You have to trust that you can keep doing it in 20, 30 years' time. And the only thing is, a lot of people in the modern world will follow people on the internet. Follow me, I can do 100 push-ups. And they're like 25 years old or 35 years old. And they go, this is great for longevity. And you go, hold on, really? What do you know about longevity if you're 20, 30, 40 years old? Whereas most of what I'm teaching now comes from the combined teachings of Iyengar in his late years, Patabi Joyce in his late years, and also my teacher's grandfather, who, the person I've learned from the last 15 years, Master Zhen Hua Yang, who I love and respect and, travel and teach with as my mentor and associate and friend. His grandfather is the last of the lineage of the bodyguards of the Emperor of China, and he's currently 120 years old, 121 this year. And when someone who's 121 years old says, do it this way for longevity, then I listen. And so they're saying things which are different to what is said by the modern fitness junkie, because the modern fitness person, and a lot of modern yoga really falls into modern fitness, doesn't take into account the physiology of the body, the mental body, and also the effects on your social life and lifestyle in general. So think about these things, and I really appreciate your comment and your question, and I'm happy to discuss it more at length as well, if you like as well. It's getting to a moment where I should actually wind up and finish. I think Carl will probably tell me that in a second. So there's a few other questions. Let me see. So yeah, I'll read out some of the comments people have said, and maybe I'll make a couple of comments. So Unicorn Verse, thank you very much, has said, you don't find senior Ashtanga practitioners still doing handstand, but you see Iyengar practitioners doing this. I know so many yogis with severe injuries, they rarely talk about it. Thank you so much for teaching yoga in a sustainable way. Yes, look, many yoga practitioners that I know who practiced intensely in the 70s and 80s no longer practice. Many of them are severely injured. And trust me, the yoga they were doing in the 80s and 90s was a lot better taught than what most people are learning now when they learn off people who have only learned for 200 hours. I'm still learning. But on top of my learning, I've done 40 years of teaching, 50 years of practice. I'm a movement-based physiotherapist. But if your teacher has only done a 200-hour training and had 3 years of experience, they're not going to be teaching you as well as the teachers who learned of people from like Iyengar, Patabi Joyce in the 1980s. But those teachers now, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, many of them, myself included, have got major problems, major joint problems, major problems in the physiology of their body. Many of them have immune disorder, cancer, many of them are dead. So be careful. If yoga is that good, surely we deserve a better result in our old age than most people do. But what I'm seeing is the way yoga has been approached in the last 20 years especially, but also going back 30 or 40 years, it's not giving people any better a result than what the average person does. My sister, 62 years old, she looks incredible. She does amazing things. She's physically fit, strong, beautiful. You know what her secret was? She did nothing but the activities of daily life for the last 62 years. She just didn't overeat, and she's looking great. But why is it that so many yoga people get injuries? I believe it's because of this not realizing that we're normal people living in an unnatural world, and we can't just take on traditional practices without adapting them properly. And people are only looking for the end goal. And the end goal is the look of the posture and less of the feeling of the posture. And people need to really get out of that paradigm, which is no pain, no gain, survival of the fittest. And, if you're teaching people, I think the most important thing you teach, if you're teaching any sort of embodied practice, which might be, you might call it yoga, or you might call it qigong, or you might call it meditation, or moving meditation, any number of names, doesn't matter. But if it's an embodied practice, which you're looking for in terms of health, happiness, and longevity, then you need to make it so that you've got a pain-free functional body, yes, and that has to be sustainable. You need to also focus on these two most important things physiologically: healthy blood flow with the dominance of the parasympathetic nervous system. So your blood flows effortlessly, but your heart's not racing, and you do not feel tension or tension or stretch, or even heart racing or breathing or sweating for more than between 1 to 10% of the time. And, it's not enough to sit at a desk and do nothing and then get up and do 10 minutes of exercise. If you're going to do 10 minutes of intensity, you need to surround that by 50 minutes of gentle movement on either side. That's what gives the balance. And my recommendation, if you really want long-term results, is to maybe cut it down to maybe 1 minute in every 100, where you've got something which might be calling intense. And the surprising thing is, if you practice like that, you'll find that what you're doing to other people looks very intense, but for you, because you've been doing it for a while, it feels easy. And like I said, Olympic runners will do the same thing. They'll run really fast, but to them, they're running at a gentle pace. Whereas to us, if we're running next to them, they talk to us, you feel like saying, shut up, why are you talking while running? They're going, oh, I'm running really gently. So once you build up your fitness, then it doesn't seem stressful. And this is something which I think we need to think more of, that if you practice with a sustainable approach, then the present moment becomes sustainable, and the ever-present now exists. Then what's it called, the infinite now. You work on making now good, and the future will happen. My mum, bless her, she used to say, save the pennies and the pounds will come. Obviously she's quite old, but the same thing applies with sustainability and longevity. If you make the practice feel good while you're doing it, and don't be seduced by the effects of drugs, by overstretching, overtensing, overbreathing, where you get this marijuana, cocaine, caffeine, heroin effect, which can make you feel good, but masks what's really going on a cellular level. Make it feel good without the drugs. Then your practice feels good while you're doing it. It should feel good the next morning. It should feel good immediately afterwards. And you find that your life starts to feel better at all as well. Look, I've got to... someone has said let me say a couple more things on the comments. I'm going to be updating my website soon. I'll also send more trainings to you online as well. If you connect with me, you can also write to me. Unicorniverse said she was kicked out of, I'm not sure, him or she, kicked out of a class for not keeping the feet together in the Tadasana. Yoga was taught from male monks to male monks. In India, female hips don't have their feet too far apart. Yeah, look, you've got to be flexible. And, Mr. Iyengar said something which struck me quite fun once, because we were doing things which involved training teachers to assist and adjust people. And someone said to Mr. Iyengar, what's the most difficult part of a person to adjust, Guruji? And he goes and taps his forehead like this, meaning the brain is the hardest part to adjust, and getting people to stop being so stiff in the approach they have to their practice. Be flexible mentally, mental flexibility. There is no right, there is no wrong. We can suggest the best way, and what I do is when I teach, I try and teach in a way which is the best way that I find for most people, most of the time, to get the best effects, physically, physiologically, mentally, socially, lifestyle-wise or financially, while working in 5 temporal planes. The temporal plane of the present moment, the immediate after, the next morning, how you feel over the next few days, the short-term future, the next few weeks and months, and the long-term future. And the long-term future one, that's something we can only really trust our long old teachers for. You only get one experiment with your body. So sadly, I have to say bye-bye to you now. Oh, Maya was just asking why in Ashtanga Yoga start with the practice of a sun salute. Part of the reason is because sun salute will make you breathe more. And when you breathe more in the beginning, it helps take you out of your head into your body. That's one reason why people might do it, but there's other ways of doing it. Paul has said, thank you very much. He's got to leave. Susanna said, my website is... I'll update my website, and keen to attend my trainings. So keep looking on simonborg-olivier.com. I'll update it. And you can also write to me whenever you like, simon@simonborg-olivier.com. Hisako said, thank you. Good to know the definition of yoga synergy. Fantastic. And Liz said, pretty sure I have tendonitis of elbow due to rock climbing and chaturanga. Very common. Less weight bearing is better. And what you'll find is if you do more arm work without weight bearing, you start to get energy coming out of your arms in a way where you can really feel the prana. Look, I really appreciate all the comments and questions. If I haven't answered you, please write to me. So I'll say to everyone, where is it? To everyone, how do I find everyone? Everyone in the meeting, I'll say to you, you can contact me on WhatsApp, and I give you my telephone number, or write to me directly at simon@simonborg-olivier.com. And also, I really encourage you to join my online teacher training if you can't do the live teacher training. So the online teacher training, Carl gave me the link, maybe you could put it in, but the live teacher training we'll tell you more about soon. But the online teacher training is really, really good, and it's going to be updated on the page, which I'll give you a link to here. And so go to the live, I'll put that in the chat just there. And thank you to everyone. Really, I really appreciate you all being here. So I want to say, let me see, I'll put you on the little gallery so we can see each other's face. And if you want to put your speaker on to say goodbye, we could all say goodbye to people. I could say thank you and bye-bye to Amandina. Thank you very much, Manuela. Thank you for coming, John and Valerio and Judith and Jajing and Catherine and Betty and Lisa. Thank you. And Harry and Gina. It's not Harry. and then Kanako, thank you. Oh, how lovely to see you. And Mirika and Liz and Nicholas and Alina and Sabine and Unicorn first. Now I can see who you are. Wonderful. And Maya, thank you. How lovely to see you. And Valerio again, and Damian, and Cindy, and Anju, thank you. And Tita, how beautiful to see you all. And I think that's all I'm seeing. So I'm not sure if I can find more people on the screen, but or maybe one more, another screen. Oh yeah, I'm seeing Maya and Jackie and Vesna and Anna, bless you, and Dennis and Vidya and Brenda and Vlado. I feel like I'm play school. This is what I used to do at play school when I was a kid. And Vlado and Mark and Carl. Thank you, Carl, for everything you do to keep our website up and running. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Rachel, for being here. It's great to see you. Rachel's one of my oldest students, going back, no, she's young still, but going back to 1986. So thank you very much for being here. And also thank Dylan and Safa. Thank you for doing all the notes you do. And Thea and Tina and Igor and Jenny and Karen and Rachel and Judy. Oh, I love you guys so much. Thank you. And Kari, lovely to have you. Nigel, thanks for being here. And Jackie, and I'm seeing all these wonderful people. I think I've said hello to everyone now. Margarita, Judy, Raquel, Karen, Dylan, Safa. I think Atina, Igor. Love you guys. Anil, Anya, Lucille, Ben, bless you. Oh, I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for being here with me. It really means the world to me. It's my big passion to do this type of work. It's my real passion to teach either in person's better. Come and see me if you get a chance. Join me online or join me in person. And you write to me if you have any questions. I'll do my best. If for some reason you write to me and I don't answer, I am overbogged with emails. So write to general questions, go to info@simonborg-olivier.com, or technical questions, go to support@simonborg-olivier.com. And if you can't get me, try ringing me on WhatsApp or texting me at WhatsApp. And if you text me on WhatsApp a question, I'll try and ring you back. Sometimes it's easier to ring you back and talk, but if I can't ring you back, I can't catch you because you're in a different time zone. Maybe tell me your time zone, and I'll also maybe record a short message for you as well. And if you want, a longer consultation, then I can also do online consultations, private consultations. But I've got so much to offer you. And if you're not doing a teacher training, really consider joining our Health, Happiness, Longevity membership site. It's currently $49 a month, and you can get access to hundreds of hours of material of my courses and videos going back for 20 years, and I'm making new material all the time. Love you guys heaps. So thank you very much, and I say bye-bye, and I'll get you recording as soon as possible.
Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.
Namaste. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Guru.
Bye-bye. I'm just a naughty boy. I love you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna write to you, Simon. Thanks,
That's
buddy.
right. Yeah, all of you, write to me and I'll do my best to answer. WhatsApp, probably the easiest place right now. But, I would love to
Yeah.
see my next training. My next training and goal is going to be so fun. You can make it either a retreat for 3 hours a day, or you can make it an intensive training of 8 hours a day. I've got people interested in the deep training. That's why I make it 8 hours a day. But of course, it's not 8 hours of suffering. It's 8 hours of being in a warm bath, massaged by someone who loves you, which is interspersed with 2 to 6 hours of sometimes we talk, we understand, we do. Kanako was about to say something. What were you going to say?
Hi, nice to meet you.
Lovely. It's the same Kanako I met all those years ago.
Yeah. This is my first time joining your Zoom, and I have a question. I clicked your website and I cannot find training in Sri Lanka.
I haven't put it up yet, darling. I haven't put it up. So I'm just trying to organize next year's training as soon as possible. Currently, it's going to be, if I can find it, currently it's going to be 2nd to 9th of November next year in Sri Lanka. Let me see if I can find my training schedule for next year, if I can quickly paste it. I don't think it really, let me see. I'll put it on the screen again. I'll put it on the screen. And what was that? Sorry, say again.
I just came back from Sri Lanka yesterday.
Did you?
And I'm planning. Yes.
Did you?
And what I'm worried, I'm just worried that my English is not really good, so maybe I don't really understand you.
I think it's okay. I think it's okay because you understand enough, and can you see I put the training on it there so people can see the dates. Maybe take a screenshot of that if you want, and slideshow, play from current slide. So there's my training schedule for the next year that I know of currently. But if you want to come to my training and English is not your first language, what I try and do is I teach at least half of it in just visually based instructions. And so then I find many people have come to my trainings without English as the first language, and they're fine. And, I'll also be probably doing some trainings in foreign languages as well. And if you want to, Kanako, where are you from?
I'm from Japan.
Why not invite me to come to Japan? I haven't been for ages. I just need someone to invite me back. I don't organize my own trainings, but if someone invites me, I'll come back. And I've got beautiful translators. But was it you who translated for me 20 years ago? No.
No, when I was in Sri Lanka just a few days ago, I met a yoga teacher and he invited me this class online Zoom. So I just joined.
Okay. No, because I had a beautiful Kanako who translated for me in Japan 20 years ago. So I thought maybe it might be you, but maybe not. But I'm happy to come to Japan or anywhere. But I find even if you come to my trainings and English is not your first language, and I'm teaching in English, I can usually explain slowly, and I can also do half the practice visually, and then people get it. Especially when you feel it. I had a lovely Japanese boy come to me in Bangkok recently, and he did the whole thing. The training was in English, but he kept saying about his English not being good, but he got it, and now he's teaching part of it in Japan. And I had a good Japanese crew come to Australia. If you want to organize a Japanese crew to come to Australia, I'll run a training for Japanese people in Australia if they want to come here, come do a week. But I think you'd be fine also. Bless you guys. I better go, otherwise I get in trouble for being too long. So thank you, everyone, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Simon.
Love you guys. Love you guys heaps.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing this journey with me and yeah, let's practice. Try my practices. Keep doing them. Love you all, and I'll say bye-bye. Carl, thank you once again for everything. See you all soon and keep in touch.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bless you.
Bye.